When my husband found out that I couldn't inherit my father's estate, he screamed at me, "What? You can't inherit the property. I have no use for you anymore. We're getting divorced right now." Later, I got my revenge on my newly remarried husband and sister. My name is Linda, a 32-year-old office worker, and I've been married to Richard for 2 years. I met Richard through a relative's introduction, and we got married. My family had some wealth, but since my sister Susan and I were the only children, our relatives were worried about the inheritance and introduced me to my husband. After that, my husband started living with us at my family home. My mother passed away a few years ago, and my father, my husband, and I lived together. My husband seemed very kind and treated my father well, but a relative who introduced him to me said something concerning just before our wedding. "I know I introduced Richard to you, but be careful. He's a bit obsessed with money." I was troubled by this warning so close to our wedding, but I didn't notice any signs of grief from my husband, so we went ahead and got married. Even after marriage, I kept an eye on my husband because of the relative's words, but he didn't seem obsessed with money. However, he did seem curious about my father's wealth, casually asking how much property we had when they were drinking together. My father openly talked about it, so I didn't worry too much. Another thing my husband was interested in was my sister. My sister is 5 years younger than me, lively and outgoing, in contrast to my calm demeanor. Her relationships with men are quite flashy. She doesn't look like me, and my husband was surprised when he first saw her. Susan is quite different from Linda, isn't she? Seeing my husband fascinated by my beautiful sister, the complete opposite of plain and unnoticeable me, made me feel complicated. But the relatives introduced me as a quiet and plain-looking person because they were worried that if I didn't get married, there would be no one to inherit the family home. I thought there was no need to worry since I had a beautiful sister, but later I understood why the relatives were concerned. My father spoiled my sister, letting her go to college and even community college. After graduation, my sister didn't have any particular goal in attending college or community college. She simply didn't want to work. My mother tried to persuade her to get a job right after college, but my father insisted on letting her go to community college. After graduating from community college, my sister got a job at my father's acquaintance's company but quit after only 6 months. Her excuse for quitting surprised me. "I can't showcase my talents at that company." My mother and I were dumbfounded by my sister, who talked as if she understood everything about the job even though she hadn't worked for even half a year. But my father believed her and quickly found her another job. After she started working at the new company, my mother fell ill and was hospitalized. When my mother was hospitalized, my sister visited the hospital every day, constantly taking time off work. She eventually quit this job too, saying she needed to take care of my mother, but her care was just sitting in the hospital room chatting with my mother or staring at her mobile phone in the waiting room. I had to go to the hospital to change my mother's laundry, and my sister was no help at all. My mother might have been happy to have someone to talk to, but about a month after being hospitalized, her condition worsened to the point where she couldn't even speak. Within 2 weeks of her condition worsening, my mother passed away. My father and sister were so shaken by the sudden news that they couldn't even prepare for the funeral, so I had to take care of everything. Thanks to the cooperation of our relatives, we were somehow able to send my mother off peacefully. After my mother's death, my sister started a part-time job and moved out to live on her own, since her part-time earnings weren't enough to cover the rent. My father had been paying for her rent and utilities, and it seems she's using the money she earns for fun. Whenever her part-time salary isn't enough, she goes to my father to get some extra money. When my mother was alive, she was strict with my sister, so my father didn't give her any allowance, and now he gives her as much as she wants. I thought it was no problem if both my father and sister were satisfied with this arrangement. Even after I got married and started living with my husband in my parents' home, my father continued to give my sister an allowance. I didn't notice at the time, But my sister was also asking my husband for money, and he was happily giving it to her. He couldn't say no to my beautiful sister and would give her money, saying, "Keep this a secret from Linda. If she finds out, she might get jealous." My sister seemed to be living off the money she got from my father and husband, going to her part-time job whenever she felt like it. But that lifestyle didn't last forever. It ended when my father fell ill and had to be hospitalized. I was taking care of my father, visiting the hospital between work, but my sister never showed up. Instead, she started calling me, demanding money. "I've been getting money from Dad every month, so keep giving it to me. The rent and public utilities are all being deducted from Dad's account." She spoke to me in an angry tone, but I was surprised by the facts I learned for the first time. I was furious at my sister, who cared only about her life and not about our hospitalized father. I really wanted to hang up on her, but she seemed to be in trouble, so I asked her, "How much money has Dad been giving you every month? How much are you getting from Dad every month?" "Get a full-time job and live on the money you earn," I advised my sister. She answered grumpily, "Stop nagging. I'm getting $1,000 a month. Rent is separate, you know." I was dumbfounded by my sister, who proudly told me the amount. I thought that if I kept giving this much money to my grown-up sister every month, she would never feel like working. Seriously, I didn't think it was a big problem to give money to my sister, as I thought my father would recover soon after being hospitalized. However, my father's condition suddenly worsened, and I hurriedly contacted our relatives. The doctor also told me it was a serious situation, and I was quite shocked. I wanted my husband's support during this time, but he rarely visited the hospital, claiming he was busy with work. Moreover, when he did show up, he would ask me inappropriate questions like, "Joseph's inheritance must be huge, right? Since you and your sister are the only heirs, are you gonna split it in half?" I had no words to respond to my husband, who only talked about the inheritance. I felt both realization and disgust, understanding what the relatives meant when they said my husband was obsessed with money. When I called my sister to tell her about our father's critical condition, she was only concerned about her money. "More importantly, make sure you pay me every month. I can live without that money." The call ended abruptly, and I was furious at my sister's words. But I was also concerned about the faint male voice I heard on the other end of the phone. I had a bad feeling recognizing that voice. About a month later, my father passed away, and neither my sister nor my husband were there in his final moments. Having experienced my mother's funeral, I knew how heavy the task of preparing for a funeral could be. Moreover, neither my husband nor my sister helped with anything, and my sister didn't even attend the funeral. My husband did show up, but he disappeared right after, saying he had work. A relative who introduced me to my husband noticed his absence and asked me, "Where's Richard? It's strange for the host's husband to not be here, isn't it?" I could only respond with a wry smile. "He's busy with work, so he went home." The relative sighed at my answer, but I felt like sighing too. After my father's funeral ended, and I finally had a moment to breathe, my husband asked me with a sleazy grin, "Finally, how much did you inherit? Even if you split it in half, you must have inherited a considerable amount, right?" Just as the relatives had warned me before marriage, my husband seemed consumed with thoughts of my father's inheritance. My sister got $92 million, and I got zero. I hadn't even talked to the lawyer yet, and I was still trying to process the funeral. Looking at my husband, who was happily talking about the inheritance, I felt like laughing more than getting angry. My husband, who believed my words, immediately yelled, "What? You can't inherit any property? I don't need you anymore." "Divorce now," my husband declared. I felt the same way, so I shot back, "Let's do it. You married me for my father's inheritance in the first place. I'll divorce you." I shouted and thrust the prepared divorce papers at my husband. He seemed a little flustered, as if he had anticipated this, but he signed them anyway. As he left the house after signing the divorce papers, he said, "I'll divorce you, who gets zero inheritance, and remarry your sister Susan, who gets the $92 million, and left. I didn't care about his words and immediately proceeded with the divorce. I was able to part ways with my terrible husband. My ex-husband seemed to have started the process of marrying my sister the very next day. A few days later, I received a call from my ex-husband. Do you still believe that story? When will you handle the inheritance? Hurry up and give Susan the $92 million, my ex-husband yelled over the phone. I had been waiting for him to contact me. I didn't want to reach out to my ex-husband who had left the house on his own. I replied to him in a businesslike tone, "Let's discuss this at my place next Sunday. I'm preparing for the procedure and will be waiting." Thinking he would receive the inheritance, my ex-husband happily hung up. But I was looking forward to seeing his face when you learned the truth. On the weekend, my ex-husband and sister came to my family home. Surprised to find that I had called a lawyer, my ex-husband seemed to convince himself, "Of course, you need a lawyer when inheriting a large sum of money." Then the lawyer turned to my ex-husband with a puzzled look and began to speak, compensation claim. "Before we can discuss the inheritance, there's the matter of Linda's compensation claim against Richard." He showed my ex-husband several photos featuring him leaving my sister's house, with clear dates marked. The lawyer addressed my ex-husband. "These are evidence photos of infidelity before the divorce was finalized, so you must pay compensation." I had heard my ex-husband talking about the inheritance over the phone with my sister, and immediately asked the lawyer to investigate his infidelity. Perhaps they thought I was distracted by my father's funeral, but my ex-husband and sister met at her house almost daily, allowing me to gather plenty of evidence. The conversation shifted from inheritance to compensation, leaving my ex-husband and sister dumbfounded. But my ex-husband quickly recovered and retorted, "Compensation is nothing compared to the $92 million from the inheritance. I'll pay it right away." He signed the compensation claim documents handed to him by the lawyer, acting all high and mighty. I confirmed it and told him, "Enjoy your life with my sister who inherited zero. Since you signed, I'll make sure you pay the compensation." The moment they heard inheritance zero, my sister screamed, "Why is my inheritance zero?" My ex-husband turned bright red and angrily said, "There's no way the inheritance is zero. I won't allow you to take it all for yourself." The lawyer calmly began to explain to the furious pair, "Susan is already the stepdaughter of your late mother, and since she was not legally adopted by your late father, there is no legal parent-child relationship. Therefore, Susan cannot inherit your father's estate." I explained to my confused sister. When our parents remarried, Susan was only about a year old, and I clarified that our parents never legally adopted each other's children. I was 6 years old when our parents remarried, and I remember being happy to suddenly have a sister. However, I never thought that sister would later betray me by stealing my husband. Both parents struggled with young children, and there was a mediator who thought it best for them to remarry. My mother loved me like her real daughter, and my father cherished my sister. Perhaps my father spoiled my sister because she wasn't his biological daughter, and he wanted to be extra careful. Although both parents remarried with children, my mother, suspected by relatives of targeting my wealthy family's assets, refused to legally adopt my sister. The relatives only recommended marriage proposals to me because they knew I was the only one who could inherit my father's property. Now I understand that my father continued to support my sister financially even after she became an adult because he couldn't pass on his inheritance to her. I also never legally adopted my mother, so we weren't legally parent and child, but it never mattered in our daily lives. It seems my parents never told my sister that they were both remarried, and she only learned the truth today. My ex-husband seemed to understand the situation immediately, his face turning from bright red to pale blue. He had not only failed to get the inheritance he was expecting from my sister, but had also signed documents to pay compensation. With a blue face, my ex-husband asked me, "Was what you said? My sister gets $92 million and I get nothing a lie?" I held back my laughter and replied, "Of course it's a lie. It's to get back at you for cheating on me behind my back. Besides, there's no way a bankrupt inheritance would be worth $92 million. Even my wealthy father didn't have $92 million in inheritance." Suddenly, my sister, who had been silent, screamed, "I've been counting on Dad's inheritance and have done a lot of shopping. What will happen to the money Dad used to pay me? Will Linda pay for it?" I answered my frightened sister, "You have a reliable husband now, so you don't need it anymore, do you? Let Richard support you." My sister stared at her pale-faced ex-husband, who shook his head in response. "I've also done a lot of shopping, expecting the inheritance, so I can't afford it. Besides, I have to pay compensation, so I'm at my limit." After saying this, my husband suddenly began to apologize deeply to me. "Linda, I'm sorry, it was my fault. Will you forgive me and start over?" The lawyer, watching this, was laughing as he prepared to leave. Where had the arrogant attitude gone when he first came to the house? His deep apology looked ridiculous. After the discussion, my ex-husband and sister left dejectedly, and they soon divorced. For my ex-husband, who remarried with the goal of inheriting from my sister, he seemed to have no interest in her since he didn't get the inheritance. He even said to himself that, with the payment of compensation to me, he couldn't take care of my sister. My ex-husband had no assets, so it was decided to pay the compensation in installments from his monthly salary. The lawyer advised me that this way I wouldn't miss out. My sister, without the support of our father, had to work part-time every day, but she couldn't make the debt payments and ended up filing for personal bankruptcy. Afterward, she even gave up her condominium and disappeared, and no one knows where she went. My father had been supporting my sister financially, but by spoiling her like that, she became unable to work seriously. Afterward, I started living alone in my family home, and some relatives talked about introducing me to a potential marriage partner, but I declined. I didn't want to be introduced to another man like my ex-husband, so this time I want to find a marriage partner on my own.
I stared at my phone, dumbfounded by Kevin's invitation. It had been years since we last spoke, our lives diverging after college. While his carefree spirit beckoned adventure, my world revolved around spreadsheets and the monotonous rhythm of corporate life. "I don't know, Kev," I said hesitantly. "A camping trip seems exactly what you need," he interrupted. "When was the last time you stepped out of that office, Harper?" His words struck a chord. Between caring for my ailing father and the endless grind at work, I couldn't remember the last time I'd done something for myself. "You've got a point," I conceded, "but I can't just drop everything." "Yes, you can," he insisted. "One weekend, Harper. That's all I'm asking. We'll hike, tell stories by the fire, and you can rediscover that spark you've been missing." My practical side battled with the yearning for adventure. With a deep breath, I made a decision that would alter the course of my life forever. "All right, I'm in." The following Saturday, I found myself at a coffee shop surrounded by an eclectic group of Kevin's friends. As I sipped my latte, trying to appear nonchalant, Kevin approached with a tall, rugged-looking man in tow. "Harper, this is Miles," Kevin announced, "our resident outdoorsman and guide for the weekend." Miles extended a calloused hand, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Pleasure to meet you. Kevin tells me you're an accountant?" I nodded, suddenly self-conscious about my corporate attire amidst their casual hiking gear. "Well, we'll have to toughen you up," Miles said with a wink. "The great outdoors doesn't care about numbers." His teasing put me at ease, and I found myself laughing alongside the others. As we set off for the trailhead, I couldn't shake the feeling that this trip would be more than just a weekend escape. The hike proved more challenging than I anticipated, but Miles stayed by my side, offering encouragement and tips. With each step, the weight of my responsibilities seemed to lighten. "First time hiking, Harper?" he asked, noticing my labored breaths. "Is it that obvious?" I replied, trying to mask my struggle. Miles chuckled. Don't worry, we all started somewhere. Just take it at your own pace. As the day progressed, I found myself opening up to Miles about my life, the endless hours at the office, caring for my father, and the constant feeling of being trapped. He listened intently, understanding the burdens I carried. That night, huddled around the campfire, I felt a sense of belonging I hadn't experienced in years. Miles's stories of his adventures captivated me, painting vivid pictures of landscapes I'd only dreamed of seeing. "Why don't you ever travel, Harper?" he asked, his gaze piercing through the flickering flames. I shrugged, unsure of how to articulate the weight of my responsibilities. Too much to leave behind, I guess. Miles nodded, understanding without judgment. In that moment, I caught a glimpse of a different life, one filled with freedom and possibility. The next morning, I awoke in the tent, my body aching but my spirit renewed. As I emerged, Miles was already brewing coffee over the campfire. "Morning, Harper," he greeted with a warm smile. "Ready for another adventure?" I took a deep breath, savoring the crisp mountain air. As ready as I'll ever be. And for the first time in years, I truly meant it. The morning after our camping trip, I found myself back at the coffee shop, surrounded by Kevin's friends. The air buzzed with excitement as everyone recounted their favorite moments from the weekend. "Did you see the look on Harper's face when she reached the summit?" Kevin teased, nudging me playfully. "I thought she was going to keel over." I rolled my eyes, but couldn't help grinning. "Hey, cut me some slack. It was my first real hike." "You did great, Harper," Miles chimed in, his voice sending a flutter through my chest. "Not everyone takes to the outdoors like a natural." Our eyes met, and for a moment it felt like we were the only two people in the room. Kevin cleared his throat, snapping us back to reality. "So who's up for another adventure next month?" he asked, rubbing his hands together mischievously. The group erupted in a chorus of cheers and laughter, but I stayed silent, suddenly aware of the weight of my responsibilities waiting for me at home. Miles must have noticed my hesitation. "You know, Harper, you don't have to decide right away," he said gently. "Just think about it." I nodded, grateful for his understanding. As the group dispersed, Miles lingered behind. "I meant what I said out there," he murmured. "You were incredible this weekend. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Before I could respond, he pulled me into a warm embrace, his rugged scent enveloping me. My heart raced as we parted, his touch igniting a spark I thought had long extinguished. "See you around, Harper," he said with a wink, disappearing into the bustling city streets. Over the next few months, our camping trips became a regular escape from the monotony of daily life. With each adventure, Miles and I grew closer, our bond strengthened by the shared challenges and triumphs of the great outdoors. One evening, as we sat around the crackling campfire, Miles turned to me with a contemplative expression. "Have you ever thought about doing something different with your life?" he asked, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. I shrugged, unsure of how to respond. "Like what?" "I don't know," he mused. "Traveling, maybe? Seeing the world beyond those spreadsheets and cubicles?" His words struck a chord within me, awakening a yearning I'd long suppressed. Before I could overthink it, the words tumbled out. "I'd love that, Miles, but with my dad's health and my job." I trailed off, the weight of my responsibilities crashing down once again. Miles reached out, taking my hand in his calloused grip. "Harper, you can't live your life for other people. You deserve to be happy too." His words resonated deeply, and in that moment, I knew something had to change. I couldn't continue sacrificing my dreams for the sake of others' expectations. "You're right," I said, my voice trembling with a newfound determination. "I can't keep living like this." Miles smiled, his eyes shining with pride. "That's my girl." From that night on, a shift occurred within me. I started making plans, exploring options, and dreaming of a life beyond the confines of my routine. And through it all, Miles remained by my side, unwavering in his support and belief in me. Little did I know the path I was embarking on would lead me down a twisted trail of deception and heartbreak, testing the very limits of my resilience and resolve. The crisp mountain air filled my lungs as our group embarked on another hiking adventure. Miles led the way, his confident strides guiding us deeper into the wilderness. "All right, everyone, we'll take the scenic route today," he announced, adjusting his backpack. It's a bit more challenging, but the views are worth it. I exchanged a nervous glance with Kevin, who just shrugged and grinned. You heard the man, let's do this. As we trekked along the winding trail, I couldn't help but steal glances at Miles. The way he navigated the terrain with such ease and grace was captivating. Need a hand? He asked, slowing his pace to fall in step beside me. I shook my head, determined to prove myself. I've got this. Miles chuckled, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Stubborn as always. I like that about you, Harper. His words sent a flutter through my chest, and I had to force myself to keep my focus on the trail ahead. After a grueling ascent, we finally reached a breathtaking overlook. Miles gestured for me to join him at the edge, and I gasped at the panoramic view that stretched out before us. Incredible, isn't it? He murmured, his voice low and intimate. I nodded, words failing me in the face of such natural beauty. In that moment, it felt like Miles and I were the only two people in the world. As the others settled down for a well-deserved break, Miles turned to me with a mischievous grin. Up for a little detour? He asked, his eyes sparkling with adventure. Before I could respond, he grabbed my hand and led me down a narrow path, veering off the main trail. My heart raced with a mixture of excitement and apprehension, but I trusted Miles implicitly. After a short hike, we emerged into a secluded clearing, a pristine waterfall cascading into a crystal-clear pool. Miles, this is... I trailed off, unable to find the words to describe the breathtaking scene before us. He simply smiled, that familiar twinkle in his eye. I thought you might like it. Without hesitation, Miles began stripping off his hiking gear, and I averted my gaze, suddenly flustered. What are you doing? I asked, my cheeks flushing. Going for a swim, he replied nonchalantly. Care to join me? Before I could protest, he dove gracefully into the pool, resurfacing with a playful splash. I couldn't help but laugh at his carefree spirit. Come on, Harper, he called out. Live a little. Biting my lip, I weighed my options. Part of me wanted to cling to the safety of my comfort zone, but a larger part yearned for the freedom and spontaneity that Miles embodied. With a deep breath, I stripped down to my undergarments and slipped into the cool, refreshing water. Miles beamed, pulling me into an embrace that sent shivers down my spine. That's my girl, he murmured, his lips dangerously close to mine. In that moment, surrounded by nature's untamed beauty, I felt more alive than I had in years. Miles had awoken a part of me I thought had long been extinguished, a thirst for adventure, for living life to the fullest. As we floated together in the tranquil pool, our bodies intertwined, I knew that my life would never be the same again. Miles had shown me a world beyond the confines of my routine, and I was determined to embrace it, no matter the cost. Little did I know, the path I had chosen would lead me down a twisted trail of deception and heartbreak, testing the very limits of my resilience and resolve. As the sun dipped below the horizon, our group gathered around the crackling campfire, the dancing flames casting flickering shadows across our faces. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and camaraderie. All right, who's got a good story to share? Kevin asked, rubbing his hands together in anticipation. A chorus of laughter and protests erupted, but Miles remained silent, his gaze fixed on the flames. I studied his profile, mesmerized by the way the firelight played across his rugged features. What about you, Harper? He said suddenly, turning to me with a warm smile. I'm sure you've got some tales from the corporate world. I shrugged self-consciously. I don't know, Miles. My life isn't exactly the stuff of adventure novels. He leaned closer, his eyes holding a hint of mischief. Come on, there has to be something interesting in all those spreadsheets. Faced with his playful prodding, I found myself recounting a particularly harrowing tax season, complete with all-nighters and office drama. To my surprise, the group was enraptured, hanging on my every word. As the laughter died down, Miles caught my eye, a silent understanding passing between us. In that moment, I realized how much I'd been missing out on, the simple pleasures of good company and shared experiences. Your turn, Miles, I challenged, emboldened by the warmth of the fire and the camaraderie surrounding us. He grinned, that familiar twinkle in his eye. All right, but brace yourselves. This one's a doozy. Miles launched into a captivating tale of his solo trek through the Himalayas, his words painting vivid pictures of treacherous mountain passes and breathtaking vistas. As he spoke, I found myself leaning in, hanging on his every word, desperate to soak up every detail of his adventures. When he finished, the group erupted in a chorus of appreciative cheers and applause. But Miles's gaze was fixed on me, his eyes shining with a depth of emotion that sent my heart racing. "Why don't you ever travel, Harper?" he asked, his voice low and intimate. I hesitated, suddenly aware of the weight of my responsibilities. Responsibilities, I guess. Too much to leave behind. Miles nodded, his expression understanding. "I get it, but you can't let life pass you by." His words struck a chord within me, awakening a yearning I'd long suppressed. Before I could respond, Kevin chimed in, oblivious to the moment he'd interrupted. "All right, enough with the heavy stuff," he said, clapping his hands together. "Who's up for some ghost stories?" The group erupted in a chorus of laughter and excited chatter, but Miles and I remained locked in our own private moment, a silent understanding passing between us. As the night wore on, I found myself gravitating closer to Miles, drawn in by his warmth and charisma. We shared stories and laughs, our connection deepening with every passing moment. When the fire finally dwindled to embers, Miles stood, offering me his hand. "Take a walk with me?" Without hesitation, I accepted, allowing him to lead me away from the camp and into the embrace of the starry night. We strolled in comfortable silence, our shoulders brushing with every step. Finally, Miles stopped, turning to face me. "Harper, His voice trailed off, but his eyes spoke volumes, conveying a depth of emotion that left me breathless. Before I could respond, he pulled me into a searing kiss, his lips claiming mine with a fierce intensity. In that moment, all my doubts and fears melted away, replaced by a burning desire that consumed me from the inside out. When we finally broke apart, gasping for air, Miles rested his forehead against mine. "You're incredible, Harper," he murmured, his words sending shivers down my spine. "Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." As we made our way back to camp, our fingers intertwined, I knew that my life had been forever changed. Miles had awakened a fire within me, a thirst for adventure and passion that I could no longer ignore. Little did I know, the path I had chosen would lead me down a twisted trail of deception and heartbreak, testing the very limits of my resilience and resolve. I awoke to the gentle rustle of the tent fabric, the crisp morning air seeping in. As I blinked away the remnants of sleep, the memories of the previous night came flooding back. Miles's kiss, the intensity of his embrace, the way he had ignited a fire within me. Carefully I unzipped the tent flap, squinting against the bright morning sun. Miles was already up, tending to the campfire, his movements fluid and confident. He glanced up as I emerged, a warm smile spreading across his rugged features. "Morning, sleepyhead," he greeted, his voice rich and inviting. "Coffee's almost ready." I nodded, still feeling a bit dazed from the events of the night before. As I approached the fire, Miles handed me a steaming mug, his fingers brushing against mine in a simple yet electrifying touch. "Thanks," I murmured, taking a tentative sip and savoring the rich, earthy flavor. Miles studied me for a moment, his eyes sparkling with amusement. "You look like you could use some more rest. Rough night?" A flush crept up my cheeks as I recalled the passionate embrace we had shared under the stars. "You could say that." He chuckled, that familiar twinkle in his eye sending butterflies fluttering through my stomach. "Well, I hope you're ready for another adventure today. I've got something special planned." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Oh, and what might that be?" Miles simply grinned, that mischievous glint in his eye. "It's a surprise, but trust me, you're going to love it." As we set off on the day's hike, I couldn't help but steal glances at Miles, my mind replaying the events of the previous night. The way he had held me, kissed me, it was as if he had awoken a part of me that had been dormant for far too long. Miles seemed to sense my distraction, reaching out to give my hand a gentle squeeze. "You okay over there?" I nodded, offering him a reassuring smile. "Yeah, just taking it all in." He grinned, that infectious enthusiasm lighting up his face. "Well, get ready, because we're almost there." As we rounded a bend in the trail, a breathtaking sight came into view. A secluded waterfall cascading into a crystal-clear pool, surrounded by lush foliage and towering peaks. "Miles, this is—" I trailed off, at a loss for words. He simply smiled, that familiar twinkle in his eye. "I knew you'd like it." Without hesitation, he began stripping off his hiking gear, and I couldn't help but admire the toned lines of his body. When he caught me staring, he winked playfully. "Care to join me for a dip?" I bit my lip, suddenly self-conscious. But the allure of the cool, inviting water and the prospect of being close to Miles again was too strong to resist. Slowly, I peeled off my own layers, trying to ignore the way Miles's gaze raked over my exposed skin. When we were both down to our undergarments, he extended his hand, his eyes burning with an intensity that set my heart racing. "Trust me," he murmured, his voice low and seductive. I placed my hand in his, allowing him to lead me into the refreshing embrace of the pool. As the water enveloped us, Miles pulled me close, his muscular arms wrapping around me in a possessive embrace. "You're incredible, Harper," he whispered, his lips brushing against my ear. "Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." In that moment, surrounded by nature's untamed beauty and cradled in Miles's strong embrace, I felt more alive than I ever had before. He had awakened a fire within me, a thirst for adventure and passion that I could no longer ignore. As our bodies intertwined beneath the cascading waterfall, I surrendered myself to the moment, allowing the rush of desire to consume me. Miles claimed my lips in a searing kiss, his touch igniting a blaze of emotions that threatened to consume us both. Little did I know that the path I had chosen would lead me down a twisted trail of deception and heartbreak, testing the very limits of my resilience and resolve. But in that moment, none of that mattered. Only the intensity of our connection, the promise of a future filled with passion and adventure. The waterfall's gentle roar filled my ears as I clung to Miles, our bodies intertwined beneath the cascading waters. His strong arms encircled me, our kiss deepening with a fierce intensity that left me breathless. When we finally broke apart, gasping for air, Miles rested his forehead against mine, his eyes shining with a depth of emotion that sent shivers down my spine. "Harper," he murmured, his voice thick with desire. "I've never felt this way about anyone before." I traced the sharp line of his jaw, marveling at the way the water droplets clung to his tanned skin. "Neither have I." He captured my hand in his, pressing a tender kiss to my palm. "Stay with me, Harper. Let's make this adventure last forever." My heart raced at the implications of his words, the promise of a future filled with passion and freedom. Before I could respond, he silenced me with another searing kiss, his touch igniting a fire within me that threatened to consume us both. From that moment on, our bond only deepened, forged in the crucible of our shared experiences and the intensity of our connection. Miles showed me a world beyond the confines of my routine, a life filled with adventure and possibility. A year later, as we stood hand in hand beneath the same waterfall where our love had blossomed, Miles dropped to one knee, his eyes shining with determination. "Harper," he began, his voice steady despite the tremor of emotion, "you've shown me what it means to truly live, to embrace every moment and cherish the beauty in this world. You've awakened a fire within me that I never knew existed." He reached into his pocket, producing a simple yet elegant ring. "Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of embarking on the greatest adventure of all, a life together?" Tears of joy streamed down my cheeks as I nodded, rendered speechless by the depth of his love and devotion. Miles slipped the ring onto my finger, sealing our promise with a kiss that set my soul ablaze. Our wedding was a simple yet beautiful affair, a celebration of our love and the unbreakable bond we had forged. As we exchanged vows beneath the open sky, surrounded by the majestic peaks that had witnessed the blossoming of our romance, I knew that I had found my forever. The years that followed were filled with adventure and passion, our love only growing stronger with each challenge we faced together. We traveled the world, explored hidden corners of the globe, and cherished every moment of our shared journey. But eventually the responsibilities of life caught up with us. When my father's health began to decline, Miles didn't hesitate to support my decision to move him into our home and become his caretaker. "Your family is my family, Harper," he assured me, his eyes shining with unwavering devotion. "We'll get through this together." Little did I know that those words would be put to the ultimate test, as the path we had chosen led us down a twisted trail of deception and heartbreak, testing the very limits of our resilience and resolve. 4 years after our fairy tale wedding, the harsh realities of life began to catch up with us. My father's health had taken a turn for the worse, and the decision to move him into our home weighed heavily on both of us. "Are you sure about this, Harper?" Miles asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "It's a huge responsibility." I nodded, my resolve unwavering. "He's my dad, Miles. I have to do this." Miles pulled me into a warm embrace, his strong arms offering reassurance. "You know, I'll be here every step of the way, right? We're in this together." His words brought me comfort, but deep down, I knew the strain this would put on our relationship. Caring for my ailing father would consume much of my time and energy, leaving little room for the adventurous lifestyle we had once enjoyed. True to his word, Miles stepped up to the challenge, helping with my father's care and offering unwavering support. But as the months wore on, the financial burden began to take its toll. "I've been crunching the numbers," I said one evening, my voice laced with worry. "Between Dad's medical expenses and the loss of my income, we're stretching thin." Miles reached across the table, taking my hand in his calloused grip. "We'll figure it out, Harper. Money isn't everything." But the strain was evident in his eyes, a flicker of doubt that he tried to conceal. I knew he was putting on a brave face for my sake, but the cracks were beginning to show. As my father's condition deteriorated, I made the difficult decision to quit my job, devoting myself entirely to his care. Miles supported my choice, but the financial strain only intensified. "I've been picking up extra work," he admitted one night, his voice tinged with exhaustion, "doing some freelance gigs to make ends meet." I studied his weary expression, guilt gnawing at my conscience. "Miles, you shouldn't have to shoulder this burden alone." He forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's temporary, Harper. We'll get through this, I promise." But as the weeks turned into months, Miles grew increasingly distant, his once vibrant spirit dimming under the weight of our circumstances. I tried to broach the subject, but he would brush me off, insisting everything was fine. It wasn't until I stumbled upon a stack of unpaid bills and notices from creditors that the truth began to unravel. Miles had been hiding a secret from me, a gambling addiction that had spiraled out of control, leaving us drowning in debt. When I finally confronted him, the floodgates opened, and the depth of his deceit came crashing down upon us. "I'm sorry, Harper," he choked out, his eyes brimming with tears. "I never meant for it to go this far." Anger and betrayal coursed through my veins as I realized the extent of his lies. The man I had trusted, the partner I had vowed to spend my life with, had been living a double life, jeopardizing everything we had built together. "How could you, Miles?" I cried, my voice trembling with anguish. "After everything we've been through, how could you do this to us?" His shoulders slumped, defeat etched into every line of his face. "I never asked for this life, Harper. I needed an escape." In that moment, the weight of his betrayal was suffocating, threatening to crush the very foundation of our love. As I looked into his eyes, I saw a stranger, a man consumed by his own demons, willing to sacrifice everything for the thrill of the gamble. Little did I know that this was just the beginning of a twisted trail of deception and heartbreak, a path that would test the very limits of my resilience and resolve, forcing me to confront the harsh reality of the man I had once called my soulmate. The weight of Miles's betrayal hung heavy in the air, suffocating me with each breath. As I stared into his tear-filled eyes, I saw a stranger, a man consumed by his own demons, willing to sacrifice everything we had built together for the thrill of the gamble. "How long?" I asked, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. "How long have you been lying to me?" Miles couldn't meet my gaze, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Too long," he whispered, shame etching lines into his once vibrant face. In that moment, the full extent of his deceit hit me like a physical blow. The man I had trusted, the partner I had vowed to spend my life with, had been living a double life, jeopardizing everything for his addiction. As the shock began to wear off, anger took its place, a white-hot fury that coursed through my veins. "Get out," I spat, my hands balling into fists at my sides. Miles's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Harper, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" I shouted, the dam of emotions finally bursting. "How you've been gambling away our future, how you've been lying to me, day after day, while I poured my heart and soul into this family?" He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off, the words tumbling out in a torrent of hurt and betrayal. "No, Miles, I don't want to hear it. Not anymore. I took a deep, shuddering breath, steeling my resolve. I want you out of this house. Tonight. A flicker of defiance flashed in his eyes, but it was quickly extinguished by the weight of his shame. Without a word, he turned and walked out, the sound of the door slamming behind him echoing through the empty silence. In the days that followed, I methodically untangled the web of lies Miles had spun, uncovering the full extent of his gambling debt and the secret life he had been leading. With each new revelation, the man I had loved slipped further away, replaced by a stranger whose actions had shattered my world. It wasn't until I stumbled upon a hidden stash of letters and photographs that the final, devastating truth came to light. Miles had been living a double life, with a secret family and children I had never known existed. As I stared at the smiling faces of the woman and 2 children in the photographs, a wave of nausea washed over me. How could he have done this? How could he have so callously betrayed not only me, but an entire other family? In that moment, something inside me shifted. The anger and hurt gave way to a burning determination for justice, for retribution against the man who had so thoroughly deceived us all. With a steely resolve, I began to piece together a plan, meticulously gathering evidence and reaching out to Miles's other victims, his first wife and children, who had been left in the dark about his double life. When I finally confronted him, Miles broke down, his carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of his lies. "Please, Harper," he begged, tears streaming down his face. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I was weak, and I lost control." But his pleas fell on deaf ears. The man I had once loved was gone, replaced by a shell of a human being consumed by his own selfish desires. In the end, my revenge was swift and merciless. I exposed Miles's gambling addiction and secret family to our friends and loved ones, watching as his reputation crumbled to dust. His first wife filed for divorce, and he found himself cut off from the very support system he had taken for granted. As for me, I channeled my pain into a newfound purpose, helping other families torn apart by addiction and deception. Through my work, I found redemption and a sense of closure, finally able to leave the twisted trail of heartbreak and betrayal behind me. Miles's fate was sealed, a cautionary tale of what happens when one allows their demons to consume them. And though the scars of his betrayal would never fully heal, I took solace in the knowledge that I had emerged from the darkness stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. The tension hung thick in the air as I took my usual seat at the worn oak table, steeling myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. Ronan's cold, distant gaze never wavered as he folded his hands on the scarred tabletop, the setting sun filtering through the kitchen window, casting an eerie glow on his features. "Alara, we need to talk," he began, his voice carefully measured, devoid of any warmth or emotion. My stomach churned with dread, but I remained silent, waiting for the inevitable. I'm leaving you," Ronan said, the words cutting through the oppressive silence like a knife. I stared at him, stunned, as his next words shattered the fragile veneer of our marriage. "I'm in love with someone else. Celeste. She's pregnant, and we're going to start a new life together." The air left my lungs in a rush, and I gripped the edge of the table, knuckles turning white. Ronan, my husband of 10 years, the man I had built a life with, was abandoning me. For her. A woman young enough to be his daughter, who had wormed her way into our lives under the guise of a perfect, doting partner. "How could you do this to me?" The words escaped my lips in a hoarse whisper, laced with a mixture of disbelief and anguish. "After everything I've sacrificed for you, for your mother." Ronan's eyes narrowed, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. "Don't make this about you, Alara. This is about my happiness, something I haven't had in a very long time, thanks to you." I recoiled as if he had struck me, the pain of his callous words searing through my chest. "Your happiness?" I spat, my voice rising with each word. "What about my happiness? What about the life we built together?" Ronan scoffed, shaking his head. "That life was nothing but a burden. You constantly nagged me about our finances, about starting a family. I couldn't take it anymore. Celeste understands me in a way you never did." Margot, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, stepped forward, her frail frame trembling with barely contained fury. "How dare you, Ronan? Alara has devoted herself to this family, to caring for you and me. And this is how you repay her? Ronan's jaw tightened, his gaze flickering to his mother, a spark of defiance in his eyes. "Stay out of this, Mother. This is between Alara and me." "No, Ronan," I interjected, my voice steady despite the maelstrom of emotions raging within me. "This affects all of us. How could you do this? How could you just throw everything away?" Ronan's lips curled into a cold, humorless smile. "Because I can. Because I'm done. I'm leaving, Alara, and there's nothing you can do to stop me." With those final words, he rose from his chair and strode out of the kitchen, leaving me and Margot in stunned silence. I stared at the empty doorway, my mind racing, the weight of his betrayal threatening to crush me. But even as the tears threatened to spill, I knew one thing with certainty. I would not go down without a fight. The minutes after Ronan's bombshell announcement felt like an eternity. Margot and I sat in stunned silence, the air thick with a mix of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. But in the midst of the chaos, a spark of determination ignited within me. "We can't just let him do this," I said, turning to Margot, my voice laced with resolve. "There has to be something we can do." Margot's eyes narrowed, a glimmer of steel in her gaze. "Oh, there is, my dear. That boy has always been reckless, thinking he can get away with anything, but this time he's gone too far." I watched as Margot's fingers tightened around the armrest of her chair, her knuckles turning white. I always knew that Celeste was trouble, the way she wormed her way into our lives, acting all sweet and innocent, but I saw right through her facade. "What do you mean?" I asked, leaning forward. That Margot let out a weary sigh. There were little things, little clues that didn't add up. The way she would always steer the conversation away from her past, the expensive gifts she would lavish on Ronan. I had my suspicions, but I never imagined it would come to this. I felt a surge of hope. If Margot had noticed something off about Celeste, maybe there was a way to uncover the truth and use it against Ronan and his mistress. "We need to dig deeper," I said, determination etching itself into my features. "I won't let him do this to us, to me. Not without a fight." Margot nodded, a grim expression settling on her face. "Then that's exactly what we'll do. I may be old, but I still have a few tricks up my sleeve." Over the next few days, Margot and I set to work, scouring through every piece of information we could find on Celeste. We combed through her social media profiles, her financial records, anything that might give us a clue about her true nature. And then, just as we were about to give up, we stumbled upon a bombshell. "Alara, look at this," Margot said, her voice trembling with a mix of shock and triumph. She thrust a stack of papers into my hands, and as I pored over the documents, I felt my breath catch in my throat. "This can't be real," I whispered, my fingers trembling. "Celeste she's involved with a criminal organization?" Margot nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "It seems our dear Ronan has gotten himself tangled up with some very dangerous people, and if we play our cards right, we can use this to our advantage." I looked up at Margot, a flicker of hope igniting in my chest. "You mean we can get back at them? Make them pay for what they've done?" Margot's lips curled into a grim smile. "Exactly, my dear. And I know just the person who can help us." With that, she reached for the phone, her fingers dancing across the keypad. I watched, a sense of anticipation and trepidation building within me. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. Ronan and Celeste would not get away with this. Not if I had anything to say about it. The phone call Margot made that day proved to be a turning point in our quest for justice. Within a matter of hours, a well-dressed, nondescript man named Everett arrived at our doorstep, his sharp eyes scanning the room with a calculating gaze. "So you've got a problem with your son-in-law and his girlfriend, Everett said, his deep voice carrying a hint of amusement. "Sounds like you ladies could use a little professional help." Margot wasted no time in laying out the details, her voice laced with barely contained fury. "That scoundrel has betrayed my daughter, drained our savings, and is now running off with some harlot who's involved with a criminal organization. We want him to pay for what he's done." Everett's eyebrows rose slightly, and he turned his gaze to me. "And what about you, Miss Alara? Are you ready to play hardball?" I met his stare with unwavering determination. "I am. Ronan has taken everything from me. My marriage, my financial security, my future. I want him to pay for his deceit, and I want Celeste to go down with him." Everett's lips curled into a slight smile. Good, then let's get to work. Over the next few weeks, Everett proved to be a formidable ally. With his connections and expertise, he swiftly uncovered the truth about Celeste, her involvement with a notorious criminal syndicate, her elaborate web of lies and manipulation. This Celeste woman is no ordinary mistress, Everett said, his eyes narrowing as he pored over the documentation. She's using Ronan as a pawn, siphoning his resources to fund her organization's nefarious activities. Margot let out a harsh laugh. I knew that little viper was up to no good, and Ronan the fool has fallen right into her trap. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction at the revelation. So, what do we do now? How do we bring them down? Everett's gaze hardened. We take them out, one piece at a time. First, we need to expose Celeste's true nature to Ronan, shatter the illusion he's living in. Then we start chipping away at his career and finances until he has nothing left. Margot leaned forward, her eyes glinting with determination. And what about Celeste's criminal connections? Surely we can use that against her. Everett nodded. Absolutely. I have a few ideas on how we can disrupt her organization's operations, sow discord among her partners. That should make her very, very uncomfortable. As Everett outlined his plan, I felt a surge of anticipation. Ronan and Celeste had underestimated us, thinking they could get away with their betrayal. But they were wrong. We had the upper hand now, and I was more than ready to use it. Let's do it, I said, my voice firm. I want them to pay for what they've done. I want them to feel the same pain and humiliation that they've inflicted on me. Everett's smile widened. Then let's get to work, ladies. This is going to be a wild ride. With that, we dove headfirst into our carefully crafted scheme, determined to bring Ronan and Celeste's world crashing down around them. I may have been the victim, but now I was the one holding all the cards. The evidence Everett had uncovered was a powerful weapon, and we wasted no time in putting it to use. With a newfound sense of purpose, Margot and I confronted Ronan, ready to unleash the full force of our carefully orchestrated plan. Ronan's face twisted into a sneer as I laid out the damning details before him. You think a few papers are going to scare me, Alara? I hold all the cards here. Celeste and I are going to start a new life together, and there's nothing you can do to stop us. I felt a surge of anger at his arrogance, his blatant disregard for the pain he had caused. Oh, Ronan, you have no idea what you're up against, I said, my voice dripping with cold fury. Celeste isn't who you think she is. She's been using you, siphoning your resources to fund her criminal activities. Ronan's eyes widened briefly, but his expression quickly hardened. You're lying. Celeste loves me, and she would never do something like that. Wake up, Ronan, Margot interjected, her frail frame trembling with barely contained rage. Your precious Celeste is nothing more than a snake in the grass, and you're the one who's been fooled. Ronan's jaw tightened, and he leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. You two are grasping at straws. Celeste and I are going to be together, and there's nothing you can do about it. I met his gaze unflinchingly, a steely determination burning in my chest. Oh, we can do plenty, Ronan, and we will. You've taken everything from me. My marriage, my financial security, my future. Now it's time for you to pay. Ronan scoffed, shaking his head. You're delusional, Alara. You think you can just waltz in and ruin my life? I hold all the power here. Celeste and I are going to live happily ever after, and there's nothing you can do to stop us. I felt a surge of disgust at his arrogance, his complete disregard for the pain he had caused. You're wrong, Ronan. We have the evidence to expose Celeste's true nature, and we're going to use it to bring you both down. Ronan's expression darkened, and he leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming against the table. Go ahead, Alara. Do your worst, but I promise you, you'll regret it. With that, he stood and strode out of the room, leaving Margot and me in stunned silence. But as the door slammed shut behind him, I felt a newfound determination settle in my bones. Well, Alara, Margot said, her voice laced with a hint of pride, it seems we've struck a nerve. I nodded, a grim smile tugging at the corners of my lips. Yes, we have, and now it's time to put our plan into action. Over the next few weeks, Margot and I, with Everett's guidance, set our plan in motion. We meticulously dismantled Ronan's carefully constructed facade, exposing his affair and financial misdeeds to his employer, leading to his dismissal. We used social engineering to sow discord between Ronan and Celeste, planting seeds of doubt that slowly eroded their relationship. And all the while, Ronan remained unaware of the full scope of our plan, his arrogance blinding him to the impending doom that was about to descend upon him. As the weeks passed, I watched with a grim satisfaction as Ronan's carefully constructed world began to crumble around him. With Everett's guidance and Margot's unwavering support, I systematically dismantled every aspect of Ronan's life, leaving him desperate and powerless. First, I targeted his career. Using information from the private investigator, I meticulously laid out the evidence of Ronan's financial misdeeds and his affair with Celeste to his employer. Within days, he was summoned to a meeting and unceremoniously fired, his reputation in shambles. The look of utter disbelief on Ronan's face when he returned home, his briefcase clutched tightly in his hand, was almost enough to make me feel remorse. But then I remembered the anguish he had inflicted on me, the way he had so callously discarded our marriage, and any pity I might have felt dissipated. "What is the meaning of this, Alara?" he demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. "How dare you meddle in my professional life?" I met his gaze unflinchingly, my expression cold and impassive. "I told you, Ronan, you've taken everything from me, and now it's time for you to pay." Margot, who had been silently observing from the corner, spoke up, her voice laced with venom. "You have no one to blame but yourself, you foolish boy. Your greed and your selfishness have brought this upon you." Ronan's eyes darted between us, his face flushed with rage. "This isn't over, Alara. Celeste and I will find a way to start a new life, and you won't be able to stop us." I laughed, the sound devoid of any warmth. "Oh, Ronan, you still don't understand, do you? Celeste is not who you think she is. She's been using you all along, draining your resources to fund her own criminal activities." The color drained from Ronan's face, and for a moment I saw a flicker of doubt cross his features. "No, that can't be true. Celeste loves me. She would never—" "Open your eyes, Ronan," Margot interjected, her frail frame shaking with barely contained fury. "That woman is a snake, and she's been playing you for a fool. And now you're about to lose everything because of your own arrogance and stupidity." Ronan's expression darkened, and he took a step towards us, his fists clenched at his sides. "I won't let you ruin this for me, Alara. Celeste and I are going to be together, no matter what it takes." "Oh, but you already have, Ronan," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You see, we've been working with a private investigator, and he's uncovered the truth about Celeste's involvement with a notorious criminal network." Ronan's eyes widened, and for a moment he seemed to lose his footing, the realization of his mistake dawning on him. "You're lying. Celeste would never—" "Believe it, Ronan," I interrupted, my tone unyielding. "Celeste is nothing more than a con artist, and you've been her pawn all along. And now it's time for you to face the consequences of your actions." With that, I turned on my heel and left the room, Margot following close behind. As we walked away, I could feel Ronan's eyes burning into my back, the weight of his rapidly crumbling world bearing down on him. It was a small victory, but it was only the beginning. I knew that Ronan and Celeste wouldn't go down without a fight, and I was more than ready to meet them head-on. This was a game of cat and mouse, and I was determined to emerge victorious. As the weeks passed, Ronan's world continued to crumble around him. The revelations about Celeste's criminal connections and his own misdeeds had a devastating impact, shattering the carefully constructed facade he had built. I watched with a mix of satisfaction and pity as Ronan's life unraveled. He lost his job, his reputation tarnished beyond repair. Celeste, once the object of his affection, turned on him, abandoning him in his darkest hour. The day Ronan finally realized the full extent of his downfall was etched into my memory. I'll never forget the look of utter despair on his face as he stood before us, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "This can't be happening," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Celeste, she's betrayed me. Everything I've worked for, everything I've sacrificed, it's all gone." Margot, her frail frame belying the steely resolve in her eyes, stepped forward, her expression unforgiving. "That's what you get, Ronan, for your greed and your selfishness. You deserve every bit of this punishment." Ronan's gaze snapped to his mother, a flicker of defiance igniting in his eyes. "How dare you, Mother? This is all your fault and Alara's." If you two hadn't meddled in my life, I'd be happy right now with Celeste and our child. I felt a surge of anger at his words, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. Your happiness? What about my happiness, Ronan? What about the life we built together? You threw it all away without a second thought. Ronan scoffed, shaking his head. You were never enough for me, Alara. Celeste understood me in a way you never could. She saw my potential, my ambition. You were just a burden, holding me back. The words felt like a physical blow, and I had to fight the urge to lash out at him. But before I could respond, Margot stepped in, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. How dare you, you ungrateful boy! Alara has sacrificed everything for this family, for you, and this is how you repay her? With lies and betrayal? Ronan's expression hardened, and he took a step towards Margot, his voice laced with venom. Stay out of this, Mother. This is between Alara and me. No, Ronan, I interjected, my voice steady despite the maelstrom of emotions raging within me. This affects all of us. Your actions have consequences, and now you're going to face them. Ronan's eyes widened as I produced a small recording device, the display flashing with the timestamp of our previous confrontation. What is this? Insurance, I said, my lips curling into a grim smile. You see, Ronan, I knew you wouldn't go down without a fight, so I made sure to document everything, including your confession of infidelity and your admission of financial crimes. Ronan's face drained of color, and he took a step back, his hands trembling. You can't do this. That recording is inadmissible, and you have no proof of my wrongdoings. I shook my head, my expression unyielding. Oh, but we do, Ronan. Everett has been working tirelessly to uncover the truth, and he's compiled a mountain of evidence against you and your precious Celeste. Ronan's eyes darted between Margot and me, his usual bravado crumbling in the face of our unwavering resolve. This can't be happening, he whispered, his voice laced with despair. But it is, Ronan, I said, my tone laced with a sense of finality. And now it's time for you to face the consequences of your actions. With those words, I turned and walked away, leaving Ronan to confront the grim reality of his shattered dreams. As I did so, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction, not out of cruelty, but from the knowledge that justice was finally being served. As Ronan's world crumbled around him, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction wash over me. The evidence we had gathered, meticulously compiled by Everett, had proven to be our trump card. I watched as Ronan's arrogance and self-assurance melted away, replaced by a growing desperation. He stood before us, his face a mask of disbelief and fury, as I revealed the full extent of my plan. This can't be happening, he stammered, his eyes darting between Margot and me. You can't do this to me. I won't let you ruin everything I've worked for. I felt a surge of vindication at his words, knowing that the tables had finally turned. Oh, but we can, Ronan. And we will. You see, we have recordings of our previous confrontations, where you've openly confessed to your infidelity and financial misdeeds. Ronan's face drained of color, and he took a step back, his hands trembling. No, that's impossible. You couldn't have. I held up a hand, silencing him. But we did, Ronan. And that's not all. Everett has uncovered a wealth of evidence linking you and Celeste to a vast network of criminal activities. Margot stepped forward, her eyes narrowed in contempt. You thought you could get away with your betrayal, didn't you, boy? Well, now you're going to pay for your sins, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Ronan's expression twisted with anguish and rage. You're lying. Celeste would never betray me like this. She loves me. She needs me. I shook my head, my voice laced with a sense of pity. I'm afraid that's not the case, Ronan. Celeste has been using you all along, draining your resources to fund her own criminal ventures. She never cared about you, only about what you could provide for her. Ronan's knees buckled, and he sank into a nearby chair, his head in his hands. No, he muttered, the words barely audible. This can't be happening. My life, my future, everything I've worked for. I watched him, my heart hardening against the sight of his despair. After everything he had done to me, to us, I felt no remorse for the consequences he now faced. It's over, Ronan, I said, my voice firm. You're going to be held accountable for your actions, both legally and financially, and Celeste will face the consequences of her crimes as well. Ronan looked up, his eyes wild with desperation. Please, Alara, you have to help me. I'll do anything, just make this go away. I can't lose everything. I can't. I held up a hand, silencing him. It's too late for that, Ronan. You made your choice, and now you have to live with the consequences. Margot and I, we're moving on. We're going to start a new life, one without you in it. Ronan opened his mouth, but no words came out. He sat there, utterly defeated, as the reality of his downfall sank in. I turned to Margot, a small, sad smile on my lips. Come on, Mother, let's go. We have a future to build. As Margot and I walked away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. Ronan had betrayed me, but in the end, justice had prevailed. And now, with the remaining assets from our marriage, Margot and I could start anew, free from the shadow of his deceit. As Ronan's world crumbled around him, Margot and I wasted no time in moving on with our lives. With the remainder of our assets, we were able to secure a comfortable new home in a quiet, suburban neighborhood, a fresh start away from the pain and betrayal we had endured. I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief as we settled into our new surroundings, the weight of the past few months slowly lifting from my shoulders. Margot, too, seemed to thrive in our new environment, her mobility issues improving as she engaged with the local community. It's amazing how much better I feel being out of that old house, Margot said one evening as we sat together on our patio, the setting sun casting a warm glow across the well-manicured lawn. That place held so many memories, both good and bad. Now it's like we can breathe again. I nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of my lips. I know what you mean, Mother. It's been a long and difficult journey, but I'm grateful we have this chance to start anew. Margot reached out and squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and affection. And I'm grateful to have you, my dear. You've been through so much, and yet you've come out of it stronger than ever. I felt a surge of emotion at her words, and I blinked back the tears that threatened to fall. I couldn't have done it without you, Margot. Your support, your unwavering belief in me, it's what kept me going. Margot chuckled, her expression softening. Nonsense, my dear. You are the one who took charge, who fought back against that despicable son of mine. I may have provided a listening ear and a shoulder to lean on, but you were the one who orchestrated his downfall. I nodded, a sense of pride swelling in my chest. It wasn't easy, but I knew I had to do it. Ronan took so much from me, from us. I couldn't just let him walk away and start a new life, not after everything he's done. Margot's expression sobered, and she squeezed my hand again. You're right, Alara. Ronan deserved every bit of what he got, and I'm glad to see that he's finally facing the consequences of his actions. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon. It was a peaceful scene, a far cry from the turmoil we had experienced just a few months ago. You know, I said, breaking the silence, I think I'm ready to start focusing on my own future again. I've spent so long taking care of others, it's time I started taking care of myself. Margot smiled, her eyes sparkling with a newfound energy. I couldn't agree more, my dear, and I'm more than happy to lend a hand. After all, we're in this together, now and always. With that, we rose from our seats and headed inside, the warmth of the evening air enveloping us. As I walked through the halls of our new home, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope and optimism for the future. Ronan's betrayal had shattered my world, but with Margot by my side, I was ready to rebuild it, brick by brick. This was a new chapter, one filled with the promise of redemption and the pursuit of happiness. And as I looked to the road ahead, I knew that whatever challenges lay in wait, I was more than ready to face them head on.
Hey, how much did you inherit? I got a bank statement with about $5 million in it. My husband smirked at the mention of $5 million. It was a sum that could indeed make anyone grin. But his expression suggested he might be scheming something. The next morning, when I woke up, my husband was already gone. Had he gone out somewhere? He wasn't in the habit of taking walks, and he had the day off from work that day. Perhaps he just wanted to take a break. Deciding to think that way, I had breakfast alone and then started cleaning the room. Then, what? Why is it gone? The bank statement that should have been securely stored in the dresser was missing. Hey! The bank statement is gone, Do you know anything about this? I called my husband in a panic. Maybe he had moved it somewhere else. Oh, that thing? I took care of it. Oh, I forgot to mention, I'm getting remarried, so we're getting a divorce, okay? Wait, what do you mean? Just look around. There's a divorce paper signed by me in the bedroom, right? Well, that's the deal. Saying that, he hung up unilaterally. Stealing the book statement, divorcing, and then getting remarried. At that moment, I felt like I might explode with anger. However, within an hour, my husband came rushing back into the entrance. What are you doing here now? Hey, what's this all about? Why didn't you tell me? I thought, oh. I see. That's how it is. Fine. I'll tell you everything. My name is Sandra. This year, I turned 50. My father was the president of a major logistics company. So I grew up in a relatively wealthy family. I was an only child and was very much cherished by my parents. But they probably disciplined me more strictly about money than other families. Remember, money can drive people mad. You should learn how to manage money from a young age. My father often told me that. Thanks to that, I started working part-time in high school and vowed, I will buy what I want with the money I earn myself, and never begged my father for money. You're also having a hard time with just the part-time job, aren't you? It's okay to rely on your father once in a while. He'd be happy if his daughter relied on him. Although I was told that, I never felt like it. And that didn't change even when I became a college student. As an adult, perhaps because I had been watching my father's work since I was a child, I naturally entered the logistics industry. The person I met there was my husband, James. Sandra, how's it going? It's hot, but let's do our best. James was 3 years my senior and always spoke kindly to me at work. Because I was a clerk and he was a truck driver, we only met a few times a day. Talking to him was something I eagerly looked forward to. I thought, what a kind person he was. Gradually, I realized I was attracted to his kind nature and, after my much effort, we started dating. Will you marry me? Yes. With pleasure. 3 years after we started dating, we happily married. Oh, truly blissful. When he proposed, I felt like I was the happiest person in the world. Now married to him for 25 years, we were blessed with 2 sons, Nathan and Brian. And lived a happy life until, one day, my husband's attitude began to change dramatically. It happened on our wedding anniversary last year. Usually, we would always go out to eat as a family with our sons. But that day my husband said for the first time that he couldn't go. Well, I don't think I can make it this year. Really? Why? I have to work that day. I just can't say no. It was work, so it couldn't be helped. I had quit my job when we got married, so I couldn't really know if it was truly work. But my husband, who usually never lied, said so. It was sad not to celebrate the wedding anniversary together. But I told him I understood and went out to eat with my sons. On the day of the wedding anniversary. Respecting my younger son's opinion. We drove about 30 minutes from home to eat at an expensive Italian restaurant. This is awesome. The ready-made meal we eat at home from the supermarket is nothing compared to this. Stop it, you're embarrassing me. As we enjoyed our rare family meal, I thought I saw my husband outside the restaurant. Huh? Honey? Mom, what's wrong? I thought I saw my husband for a moment. I decided it must have been my imagination. No, it's nothing. He was arm in arm with a young woman, so it must have been my mistake. Back home, I couldn't stop thinking about my husband. Cleaning and doing laundry, I couldn't shake the thought that he might be cheating. I'm home. I'm tired today. Oh, welcome home. You must be tired from work today. My husband, dressed in work clothes, seemed no different than usual. However, there was a pleasant smell coming from him. It was a hot period, yet he didn't seem to sweat much. After he had a bath and finished dinner, I decided to ask him. James. What's up? This might sound strange, but were you really at work today? As I asked, my husband froze for a moment. Yes, I was at work, but why do you ask? I went out for Italian with the kids at lunch. And I saw someone who looked like you walking outside with a woman. What? Are you saying I was playing around with another woman instead of working? No, that's not what I mean. I'm in a bad mood now. I'm going to bed. My words had upset my husband, and there was no more conversation that day. There was something clearly off. Could he really be cheating? The next day, my husband's mood hadn't changed, and our conversations became scarce. A year passed with that ongoing situation. One day, when he came home from work and went to take a bath, I saw his cell phone lying on the living room table. I knew it was wrong to look through someone else's phone, but I couldn't stop myself. Luckily or unluckily, the phone wasn't locked. And I could immediately see the messages and photos. What is this? On the phone, there were conversations and photos with a woman who seemed to be his mistress. It was now clear that my husband was having an affair. You're cheating, aren't you? I blurted this out to my husband. I intended to stay silent, but I couldn't forgive him for doing such things behind my back. Huh? What are you talking about? I have proof. I showed him the phone to confront him, thinking he could still talk his way out of this. However, he simply took the phone from me without concern and said, "What are you talking about? I would never cheat. This girl is just a clerk at the office. She often asks me to take pictures with her. It's tough being popular." What a ridiculous thing to say. While it might be true, I couldn't help but feel distrust towards him. Oddly enough, I found myself convinced and didn't pursue the matter further. Half a year later. Sandra. It's terrible. Come to the hospital quickly. Your father has. What happened? Calm down. What happened to Dad? He was hit by a car, he might not make it. The phone call from my mother was shocking. He might not make it. With that phrase, my heart raced. I rushed to the hospital by car, almost ignoring all the traffic lights in my haste. God, please, save my father's life. With that prayer, I arrived at the hospital and went to my father's room. Dad. In the room, there was my mother crying and my father lying there with a white cloth over his face. Sandra, your father has. Wait, this has to be a joke. Dad. Dad. Despite my desperate calls, my father never woke up. He had been severely injured by the impact of the car, nearly dying instantly. His body was covered in wounds, but thankfully, his face remained unscathed. Seeing him looking as if he was just sleeping made it all the more painful. I went back to my parents' house with my father's body in a coffin. And immediately started planning the funeral with the funeral company. Of course, I informed my husband and children about my father's death. And asked them to attend the funeral. Many people from my father's company and acquaintances attended the funeral the next day. Seeing how much he was loved made me tear up again. The funeral went smoothly, and we were able to send my father off to heaven without any issues. Sorry to bring this up now. It's about inheritance. As we were leaving the funeral home, my mother approached me. She was holding a bank statement in her hand. "What's this?" "Your father's will. He told me to give this to you after he passed away." When I looked at the bank statement, it showed a savings of $5 million. $5 million. According to my mother, I had never been financially dependent on my father. However, he had been depositing money for me every month in case something happened. I see. Thank you. Gratefully, I took the bank statement and went home with my husband and children. The next day, I went to the bank to transfer the account to my name. It's unbelievable that he had left such a large sum of money. Inheritance tax would not be trivial. Thinking about that, I returned home and placed the bank statement inside my dresser. In the evening, my husband, who had recently stopped initiating conversations, spoke to me. "You were talking about inheritance with your mother at the funeral home, weren't you? How much did you get?" "Well, I received a bank statement with about $5 million. I see." My husband smiled slyly. Hearing only about the $5 million, he seemed satisfied and went to the bedroom. I thought, what's with that? Is that all he has to say? I wasn't sure if he was grinning because of the large sum of money. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was plotting something bad. The next day, when I woke up, my husband was already gone. He wasn't in the habit of taking walks, and he had the day off from work that day. Where could he have gone? Well, he probably just went out to relax. Thinking that, I ate breakfast alone and then started cleaning my room. It's gone. Why? I'm sure I put it here yesterday. When I opened the drawer to organize the clothes in the dresser, the bank statement that was definitely there until yesterday was nowhere to be found. Maybe my husband stored it somewhere else. In a panic, I called my husband. "Hey, do you know where the bank statement is? I was sure I put it away yesterday." "Oh, the bank statement. I took it. Also, did you see the divorce papers I left in the bedroom? I'm divorcing you." I was shocked by his sudden declaration of divorce. Divorce. What are you talking about? Don't make me tell you more than once. I'm saying I'm divorcing you. I'm getting remarried. With that, my husband hung up the phone unilaterally. This is too arbitrary. After all I've done for him. I was so angry I felt like I might lose my mind. I had enough. If that's how he feels, I'll show him. I swore to get revenge on my husband, completely running out of patience. After hanging up the phone with my husband, I started thinking about how to take revenge. He must be planning to withdraw the money. With that thought, I immediately called the bank and reported the bank statement as lost. This should prevent anyone but the holder from withdrawing funds. I also signed the divorce papers and submitted them to the law office. Around 11, I heard a noisy sound from the entrance of the house along with my husband's voice. "Hey, Sandra. What the hell is going on?" He left on his own, but what's with him? I was reluctant to deal with him, but I headed to the entrance anyway. "What do you mean? I don't understand what you're saying. Why can't I withdraw money?" "So it's about that." Just as I thought. Of course, you can't. I called the bank and reported the bank statement as lost. Huh? My husband was surprised, his eyes wide. "But even if you called, that doesn't stop me from withdrawing, right? Does this guy really not know common sense? Or is he doing this because he's blinded by another woman?" Well, either way, I don't care anymore. Normally, you can withdraw with a signature. But when you lose a card or bank statement, the bank requires identification from the account holder. why didn't you tell me such an important thing? This is a problem. I was already talking about buying a house. Oh, I see. That's what this was about. He thought he could steal the bank statement with $5 million and build a new home with his mistress. Just so you know, even if you could withdraw, it wouldn't be your money. What are you talking about? I have a right to the inheritance, don't I? No way. The inheritance rights are only for me and my mother as the spouse. When I said that, my husband's shoulders slumped. Then, okay, can't I get about half? He really should take a break from being foolish. After all, he's the one who brought up divorce, and he's utterly selfish. Huh? I'm not giving you anything. We're already divorced. Divorce can be undone anytime. Impossible. I've already submitted it to the law office. Even so, we can still divide the property. He continued to irritate me. I reached my limit of patience and yelled at him. Cut it out. And property division. There's no such thing. You're the one who cheated and started talking about divorce. And you're the one who handed me the divorce papers signed unilaterally without discussing terms, right? We are strangers now. Surprised by my sudden shouting, my husband looked down and fell silent. He must have thought he had a chance by mentioning property division. But there was no chance of that. If you still want a property division, let's continue this in court. I'll fight you as much as you want. You're sure to lose, and I'll thoroughly extract alimony too. No, that's. Then get out. Don't ever show your face again. I pushed his body hard and drove him out of the entrance. I thought he might resist and make a scene at the front door. But he simply walked away dejectedly. Mom? What happened? Perhaps because I had raised my voice, my eldest son woke up rubbing his eyes. I told my son that his father had been cheating, and that was why we divorced. That's what happened, sorry. Oh, I see. I'm fine with it. I never liked Dad much anyway. Brian and I will take care of the house. Don't overdo it, Mom. Tears flowed spontaneously at my son's kindness. A month later, with my husband gone, I was spending a relaxed time at home with my sons when my second son handed me a letter. This was in the mailbox, but there's no sender's name on it. I figured it's addressed to you, Mom. What could it be? Thank you. I immediately recognized my ex-husband's handwriting in the letter. The letter said, "I'm truly sorry for having an affair without thinking of my family. I just happened to get into a good mood with a girl at a nightclub I went to with someone from work. It was my first offense, so I avoided imprisonment, but I really regret the terrible thing I did. I've lost my job and now I'm picked up by a president of a construction company I used to deal with. Working seriously every day. If I am forgiven, I would like to start over with you all. If you feel like it, please call me." What is he even talking about now? I have absolutely no intention of getting back together with my ex-husband. I threw the letter in the trash and started watching TV again. The stolen bank statement is gone for good, but I was able to get them reissued at the bank. So the precious inheritance from my father is safe. From now on, I plan to use it carefully for the sake of my children.